ARMA Reforger is gaining a ton of new players right now, and it's not hard to see why. The game is fantastic and it's on all platforms now. And while I would say it's one of the more accessible milsims, there is still a lot to learn about this game which is not super obvious. So today I'm going to give you a crash course on everything I wish I knew before I started playing. Now firstly, Reforger's built-in tutorial is actually really good. It'll walk you through the fundamentals like basic aiming and movement mechanics and the extensive amount of keybinds. Also, this guide is mainly aimed at Reforger's main conflict mode, but a lot of it's going to translate over to other modes and mods as well. Now, if you're on PC, take advantage of those mouse thumb buttons. I have mine set to the local and radio voice chat buttons. VO comms are going to be essential for this game, so make sure you have them set up where you can access them easy. Reforger also has a field manual that you can access from the main menu or even the pause menu, and it's a deep dive into basically everything you can do in the game. If you get stuck on anything, you can always look it up in the field manual. Alright, so when you hop into your first game of Reforger, you're kind of getting thrown into the deep end. So let's start off with some of the basics that aren't necessarily that basic. At the start of a match, both teams are given a main headquarters to spawn at. Aside from the tent you spawn in, your team will have to build all of the vital buildings required to run the base, like an armory and a vehicle depot. New players shouldn't worry too much about building these things, but you do need to know about how to interact with them. The armory is where you're going to customize your soldiers' gear, like weapons, healing items, clothing, gadgets, backpacks, chest rigs, ammo, and more things than that. Both teams have a limited pool of supplies that gradually refill over the course of a match. If the base you're trying to spawn at doesn't have enough supplies stored to cover the cost of your loadout, you won't be able to spawn. And if your loadout eats up tons of supplies, it'll also start to prevent your teammates from being able to spawn or access vehicles. So keeping your loadout cost effective, especially in the early game, is going to be super important. You're not going to win the match as a kitted out Rambo soloing your way through objectives. You're going to need teamwork. Now, the default loadout includes most of the things you might need on the battlefield aside from a saline bag and weapon attachments. My top recommendations are a red dot scope and a suppressor for your primary weapon. A rocket launcher as your second primary weapon is pretty solid. A backpack to store extra resources in comes in handy, and a saline bag. When night falls during a match, you can switch to an assault rifle with a grenade launcher attachment and load it up with flares. Being able to see at night is a big advantage that sort of offsets the increased loadout cost. Now, once you've equipped your gear and customized your weapon, which you can do by either holding the reload button or opening it in your inventory, you can then save your loadout at either of the armory interaction signs. Their interaction point will have a scrolling menu with multiple options, so select save loadout and you're good to go. This is also a very easy way to refill the ammo for your equipped weapon. Saving your loadout will add it as a customized loadout as an option next to the default loadout, and this is going to save you a ton of time when you spawn back in. Definitely start setting these up as you get comfortable with specific kits. Now, the default loadout only costs 10 supplies to spawn in with, and the one I recommended can cost around 50 to 60 supplies. In a tight match or a situation where the base hasn't gotten many supply runs, you could be forced to spawn in with the default loadout. You can see how much your spawn will cost in the top right of the soldier view on the deploy screen, and you can see the available supplies at a spawn point by hovering over it on the map. One way of getting around needing tons of supplies is to always loot dead bodies for additional medical items, weapons, and ammo. This is a great way of getting better gear without having it cost your team additional supplies and avoiding having to hit up an armory after an intense firefight. I'll often pick up enemy sniper rifles as my secondary weapon to keep my loadout cheap but still effective. Now, supplies are the lifeblood of your team. If you don't have any, your team is kind of dead in the water. But they're also not this ethereal currency that you can just access anywhere on the map. You actually have to spawn in transport trucks at vehicle depots, load them with supplies from your main base, and drive them to the next captured objective so teammates can spawn there and get vehicles that will help them reach other objectives. Supplies automatically replenish over time at bases, and you can see how much they earn on the deploy screen green when you hover over the base's icon. There's also supply caches scattered across the map indicated with this green symbol. These are basically neutral locations held by AI soldier factions, but you should be expecting contact with enemy players as everyone is scrambling to secure them to gain an advantage. To load vehicles with supplies, park the vehicle near them, then either go to the trunk and select load supplies or go to the supply depot sign and drag the supplies into the vehicle's inventory. You can do the same thing in reverse to unload the supplies. If you like doing supply runs, just check the map to see which bases are low on supplies and try to top them off with a nearby cache or supplies from your main base. Now regarding vehicles, if you're having trouble finding the interaction points on a vehicle like the handbrake or lights, hold Alt on PC or right bumper on console to display all the interaction points. This also works for emplacements like radios and generators, which makes quickly turning off, say, floodlights at night much easier. Also, whenever you stop to get out of a vehicle, make sure you engage that handbrake. Vehicles tend to roll away without the handbrake on. Not ideal when you thought you hid your vehicle somewhere only to have it ghost right out into the open. Finally, the larger Humvee-style trucks in Reforger have bulletproof windshields, but their side windows are not bulletproof. If you see a Humvee, wait until you get a shot at its side before firing, unless of course you have a rocket launcher. Now, once you get familiar with massive maps, navigating will become second nature. However, at the start, you're going to need to rely on your map and compass quite a bit. With the map, using the vertical and horizontal grid lines, which are called eastings and northings, you can pinpoint the coordinates of any location on the map. When you call them out, start with the vertical lines and then go to the horizontal lines. For example, this radio tower on Everon is at 044062. Finding your current location can be a little trickier though. At the bottom of the map, it'll give you a general sense of your location, like northwest of a military base, but there's some additional aids that you can use. The location you spawn at will be marked with a yellow circle. Your squad will also have a marker that follows the squad leader, but that's only useful as a reference point if you're actually with your squad leader. The compass also shows the direction you're facing with a black line, so the easiest way to orient yourself is to turn your character facing north and then up on the map is the direction you are facing. Now, when in doubt, most servers have experienced players in them that can help you get to where you need to go, either by driving you around or at least pointing you in the right direction. It's easy to hop in a friendly vehicle and just go along for the ride. Communication really is the best way to get around in Reforger. Aside from text chat, you also have proximity and radio voice chat. And regardless of which voice chat you're using, everything you say will be transmitted as proxy chat, which means you can't talk in game without people around you hearing it, which also includes enemy players, so just be aware of that. You can also loot enemy radios and eavesdrop on their communications. So generally speaking, you want to reserve idle chatter to safe locations like captured bases. Calling out really specific plans can tip off the enemy team as much as it can help yours. Now, as for where to go and what to do, the core goal of Conflict is to secure the objectives with magenta text labels on the map. Holding all of these for a set amount of time and your team will win the match, but you can't just bum rush them and capture them at the start of the match. All objectives require your team's radio signal to be in range to secure them. This is indicated on the map by a red line drawn between your HQ spawn and the objectives. Your team can use deployable radios to extend the signal or capture the objectives within the range of your base. There's also radio towers on the map which you can interact with to activate them for your team's radio signal and get a massive boost. All this is to say that the order in which you capture objectives is dictated first by your team's radio signal, and also what's going to give your team the best advantage for spawning at and launching attacks from. It might not always make sense to capture along the front lines of combat. Sometimes you want to get behind the line and disrupt the enemy's supply rats or troop transports. So once your team captures a new objective, ask where everyone is heading to next and work out the best place to move to together. On one of the matches I played, it lasted for 6 hours because our team just kept splitting up across different objectives and letting the enemy team retake one of the key points that we would need to win. We held these objectives multiple times throughout the match and we really just needed to hold them for a few minutes to win, but we kept losing them and having to retake them. Alright, so now that you know how to get a basic loadout, what supplies are, and how to get around the map and why you're going to specific locations, let's talk about the actual combat. Most enemy players will be heading towards objectives, so that's where you'll want to go if you want to get into the action quickly. Players will spawn in the available spaces at bases, like a main tent and living quarters. Players can spawn at objectives which are being contested, provided that the base actually has supplies for it. So even if there's no enemies around when you're capturing a point, you can expect them to show up quickly. You can also expect enemies along main roads outside of the objectives. They'll be hunting for vehicles or moving on foot between objectives. It can be pretty tough to spot them, and you'll probably end up dying out of nowhere to a hail of gunfire or an RPG shot. Personally, I like to deploy to places that I've died at and try to sneak in some kills before moving on to the next area. And attacking objectives is where I like to spend most of my time, so I'm pretty much always in combat or at least heading towards it. Now, of course, once you're in combat, things get pretty hairy, as this game's very realistic in that sense. I cannot recommend a suppressor enough. I've been 20 yards from enemies shooting at them and hearing, "I'm getting hit, but I don't know from where." The second you fire a non-suppressed weapon, everyone has a pretty good idea of where you are, so you're going to want to make sure that you have some backup around you, or you take out your targets as quickly as possible. Resting weapons is also super helpful for long-range combat or situations where you want to lay down automatic suppressing fire. Any waist-high cover like fences, boxes, or trucks can be used to mount your gun on. Just get into position, then hit C if you're on PC, A on Xbox, and X on PlayStation to mount your weapon. From here, you can then deploy a bipod and just fire away with massively reduced recoil and no sway. Your weapon sway is going to be affected by your available stamina and your player stance. So if you've been running, you're going to have a lot of sway until your stamina recovers. Mounting your gun can negate this, which is super helpful. You can also mount your weapon on crouched teammates, which is as funny as it sounds. Now, unfortunately, most calibers of bullets won't penetrate building walls. This makes it hard to deal with enemies in windows who are smart enough to actually take cover. But rocket launchers produce shrapnel, which does penetrate walls and can easily kill players in buildings. Now, sure, it's always fun shooting at the enemy players, but what about when you're the one getting shot? Well, Reforger has a very accessible but surprisingly deep medical system. Whenever you take damage, you have the risk of your chest, abdomen, or limbs getting injured and then even starting to bleed. Injuries range in severity, with each level causing worse side effects, and your character has a total blood volume that depletes rapidly when you start bleeding. A minor bleed can kill you in 60 seconds if you don't deal with it quickly, and that timer gets even shorter the worse the bleed is or the more of them you have. There's 4 distinct medical items you'll need to know to heal up. Bandages stop your bleeding, but they take a long time to apply, and you can even die while in the process of applying one. Tourniquets can be applied to your limbs very quickly to slow bleeding and giving you more time to bandage. Morphine temporarily alleviates the symptoms of being wounded, like slower movement or worse accuracy with guns. It can also wake up unconscious players faster, giving them more time to actually patch themselves up before they die. And finally, saline bags speed up your recovery and they restore your blood. If you get injured, the best way to heal up is to identify the worst bleed and apply a tourniquet if possible. You can apply multiple tourniquets and reuse them, so don't hesitate to apply them. From there, start bandaging whatever bleeds you couldn't tourniquet. Once you're done bandaging, remove your tourniquets and you should be good to go. The impairments caused by injuries aren't too big of a deal, so generally save your morphine for downed players to get them up faster. If your blood falls below 50%, you'll want to use a saline bag to restore it quickly. 50% is where things start to go black and white, and you're pretty much dead if you get shot even a little. Now, unless you die from a headshot, most gunshot wounds will knock you unconscious first. You have a chance to get up if you don't bleed to death first, so don't give up the second you go down. It's pretty likely you'll be able to get back up, heal your wounds, and start fighting again. Especially keep this in mind when you kill an enemy. Chances are that they're just knocked out, and you'll actually need to do the double tap to make sure. Now, Reforger has ranks that you can earn while playing. These ranks are based on your in-game actions, and they're tied to the server that you're playing on. Your rank will reset at the end of every match. You earn ranks by capturing objectives, transporting friendlies, killing enemies, and just generally being a team player. To spawn heavy-duty vehicles and weapons, you'll need to climb these ranks. It can actually take quite a while to do this, and it's not really something that you need to worry about so much as a new player, but if you start to see players calling in some more exotic gear, this is how they're doing it. Now, my final tidbit of advice is for night combat. A cool thing you can do is to equip a grenade launcher with flares to light up objectives at night. You can shoot them directly overhead at an angle or even bounce them off the ground if you want. The steeper the angle, the farther and lower that they'll go, but whatever you do, don't shoot flares directly overhead, as it'll basically light up your position for the enemies. Also, try to avoid using flashlights when possible. They give away your position worse than a UI marker. Now, you probably noticed that I didn't cover using the bigger vehicles like helicopters and BTRs. That's mainly because they're not all that accessible to new players since you have to rank up pretty high in a match to unlock them. They're also very expensive assets and are vital for pushing objectives at later stages during a match. Let the experienced players handle flying and driving until you get your bearings. That said, feel free to take a mounted weapon position on one of them, as it can be an absolute blast. So that's my best advice for getting into Reforger. Again, it's a very accessible game for a milsim, but pretty daunting if you're coming in as a casual gamer. But once you catch the Reforger bug, it's going to be hard to stay away. If there's something you want me to cover more in depth in a future guide, feel free to leave a suggestion in the comments. And if you enjoyed this guide, don't forget to drop me a like, subscribe for more content like it, and ding that notification bell to beat the YouTube algorithm with me. And if you're in the mood for another guide video, check out this one on Stalker 2, which I consider to be kind of essential for getting into the game. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.